What if the strangest chapter in Genesis holds the key to understanding our world today? Giants, Nephilim, and days so dark that God sent a flood to wipe the slate clean. But Jesus said those days will return. What does that mean for us now, and what will it demand of you? This is not just history, it's prophecy, it's a warning, and it's a hope that shines through the storm. Welcome to the story of Genesis 6, Giants, Nephilim, and the days of Noah. The shadow before the storm. A world on the brink. Shadows stretch across the earth, as heaven and earth collide in ways too strange to ignore. Before the flood came the giants, figures of terror and legend, born in a time when rebellion walked hand in hand with desire. There is a certain chill that runs through the veins of Scripture when you arrive at Genesis 6. It is a chapter cloaked in mystery, brief in words yet vast in implications, a strange bridge between the innocence of creation and the violence of the flood. Just 5 chapters earlier, God had spoken light into being, had shaped humanity from dust, and breathed life into their nostrils. He had declared the world very good. But by the time we reach the threshold of Genesis 6, the music of Eden has been drowned out by a darker tune. Something has gone terribly wrong. The opening verses strike like a riddle. When human beings began to increase on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Genesis 6, 1-2. At first glance, it reads almost ordinary, a story of marriage and desire. But then comes the phrase that has sparked centuries of debate. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Who were these sons of God? Who were the Nephilim? Giants, fallen angels, hybrid beings of mythic proportion? The text offers no lengthy explanation, only this haunting reference, then swiftly pivots to announce the total corruption of mankind and the divine decision to wipe the slate clean with a flood. It is as if the Spirit, through Moses, allows us a brief glimpse behind the curtain of a cosmic rebellion, a glimpse that raises more questions than it answers. And yet, these few lines have echoed through time like a thunderclap. They have inspired endless speculation, theological treatises, and countless myths. From ancient Jewish literature like the Book of Enoch, to early church fathers to modern Bible scholars, this mysterious episode has fascinated and unsettled those who seek to understand it. The words of Jesus only deepen the intrigue when he says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." Matthew 24:37. If the days of Noah serve as a prophetic pattern for the end of the age, then what happened in those days matters far more than mere historical curiosity. It holds eschatological weight, a warning written in the bones of history. The introduction of the Nephilim in Genesis 6 is not just a strange footnote. It is a spiritual fault line. To understand it is to explore the boundaries between heaven and earth, the seen and unseen, rebellion and redemption. This passage forces us to wrestle with the reality that Scripture does not shrink from the supernatural. It invites us into a world where angels can fall, where spiritual forces shape the destiny of nations, and where human choices ripple into eternal consequences. But here's the real tension. These verses are not simply ancient history. They are a mirror, reflecting something about the human heart and the cosmic battle that still rages. The corruption of the days of Noah was not only about strange unions and giant offspring. It was about a world intoxicated with violence, ambition, and godlessness. It was about a creation that had blurred the line between divine order and demonic chaos. And when Jesus says the last days will look like that, he is not inviting us into speculation. He is summoning us into awareness. This is why we must journey slowly through Genesis 6. We must linger in its shadows, not to sensationalize, but to understand. We will explore what the text actually says and what it does not say. We will examine the interpretive streams, the ancient Jewish perspective, the fallen angel theory, the Sethite view, and the mythological echoes that linger in world cultures. We will ask what these giants symbolize and why they matter for your life right now. And finally, we will confront the question, If the days of Noah are the blueprint for the last days, how then should we live? Before the flood came, the world was eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. Life seemed normal, on the surface. But beneath that surface lay a catastrophic moral collapse, a civilization enthralled by its own pride and appetite. In that environment, giants walked the earth. The Nephilim became the embodiment of a world out of joint, a world intoxicated with its own power and indifferent to its creator. And so, this is where our story begins. Not with the ark, not with the rainbow, but with a dark mystery, a world where heaven and earth collided in ways we can barely comprehend. The shadow before the storm. The question is not simply, who were the Nephilim? The question is, what do their days reveal about ours? And perhaps even more haunting, what does it mean that Jesus pointed back to them as the key to understanding the time of his return? Are you ready to step into the tension, to peel back the layers, and to see Genesis 6 not as a cryptic anomaly, but as a prophetic window? Then come with me into the story of giants, of rebellion, and of a God whose justice and mercy weave through it all like fire and gold. Giants in the mist. Whispers of rebellion drifted through the unseen realm. Ancient eyes watched as boundaries blurred, and the earth trembled under their weight. To understand the flood, you must first understand the fault lines that cracked the world apart. The drama of Genesis 6 is not a fable. It is a fault line in redemptive history. To grasp its meaning, we must slow down and listen to what the text is actually saying. At its core, this passage reveals three interwoven themes: the breach between heaven and earth, the corruption of human nature, and the divine resolve to set things right. Every theory about the Nephilim, whether rooted in ancient Jewish tradition, early church writings, or modern scholarship, springs from wrestling with these very themes. First, the boundary between the spiritual and physical realms. Scripture opens with an orderly creation, heaven and earth, light and darkness, male and female. Each distinction carries divine wisdom. Genesis 6 begins with a disturbing reversal of that order. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The phrase, sons of God, Hebrew, B'nai Ha-Elohim, has sparked endless debate. In the Old Testament, this expression most commonly refers to heavenly beings, angels, in texts like Job 1:6 and Job 38:7. If that same meaning holds here, Genesis 6 describes something staggering: spiritual beings crossing into the human realm in an act of rebellion against divine boundaries. This interpretation, known as the fallen angel view, dominated early Jewish thought. Books like 1st Enoch expand on the story, portraying angelic watchers descending to earth, taking wives, and producing hybrid offspring, giants whose violence devastated creation. The early church fathers like Justin Martyr and Tertullian echoed this view, seeing it as a vivid picture of spiritual corruption invading the physical world. Others, however, argue for a Sethite interpretation, that the sons of God were godly men from the line of Seth, intermarrying with the daughters of men from the ungodly line of Cain. This reading seeks to keep the narrative within human categories, emphasizing moral compromise rather than supernatural rebellion. Still others propose a royal or dynastic view, where sons of God were powerful kings claiming divine status, gathering harems and ruling with unchecked pride. Which view is correct? Each attempts to make sense of a text shrouded in mystery. Yet, whatever position you take, the implications are massive. Genesis 6 portrays a collapse of divine order, a deliberate crossing of boundaries meant to preserve life's harmony. This was not a random moral slip. It was systemic, escalating, cosmic. It is why the next verse declares, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." Genesis 6:5. Enter the Nephilim. The text says, almost in passing, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. The word itself hints at terror, from a root meaning to fall. It suggests giants, fallen ones, beings of dread. They were heroes of old, men of renown, but these were not heroes in the way we romanticize the word. They were icons of violence, predators of power, living monuments to a world spiraling out of control. In them, human ambition and spiritual rebellion merged into something grotesque. Notice the escalation: unchecked desire, blurred boundaries, violent offspring, and finally a civilization steeped in corruption. Genesis 6 does not merely describe sin. It describes a contagion spreading through creation, infecting every thought, every system, every heart. The flood was not God's overreaction. It was divine triage, a reset before the infection consumed the entire cosmos. But the story does not end in judgment. Even here, grace flickers like a candle in the wind. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. In a world collapsing under the weight of rebellion, one man walked with God. One man's obedience became the hinge on which history turned. This section forces us to grapple with questions far beyond the identity of the Nephilim. It presses us to ask, what happens when spiritual boundaries erode? What forces are unleashed when power, pride, and desire go unchecked? And what does it say about God that in the face of such cosmic ruin, his response is not to abandon, but to redeem, starting with a single obedient life? The Nephilim are not just figures in a mythic past, they are symbols of what happens when creation forgets its creator. They represent the ultimate fruit of human arrogance and spiritual rebellion, a world that exalts itself until it drowns in its own corruption. And if Jesus is right that the last days will mirror the days of Noah, then these themes are not relics. They are warnings carved into eternity. When shadows speak. Beneath the surface of history, symbols burn like embers. Giants that are more than flesh and bone, whispers of a greater war unfolding in the unseen. Genesis 6 is more than a story. It is a shadow cast across time, pointing to battles far beyond the floodwaters. The mystery of Genesis 6 does not end with historical curiosity. These few verses are charged with symbolism, pulsing with meaning that reverberates throughout Scripture. They are not only about what happened, they are about what keeps happening. To read this passage only as an ancient anomaly is to miss its prophetic weight. Here, the Nephilim stand not merely as giants of old, but as archetypes of rebellion, distortions of divine order, and harbingers of judgment. Why does the Bible mention them so briefly, yet with such haunting emphasis? Because their presence tells a deeper story, the story of boundaries crossed, of chaos unleashed, and of a creation groaning under the weight of corruption. In the ancient Near Eastern world, legends of hybrid beings, part divine, part human, abounded. Cultures spoke of demigods, titans, heroes whose strength defied mortal limits. These myths may well be distorted memories of the same primeval rebellion Genesis hints at, a time when heaven's order was shattered, and monstrous pride took form in flesh. In Scripture, this rebellion is not isolated. It echoes forward, surfacing in strange and unsettling moments. The Anakim and Rephaim haunting the Promised Land, the towering figure of Goliath defying the armies of God, the dragon-like imagery of beasts in Daniel and Revelation. These images, whether literal or symbolic, all point to one reality. When creation rebels against its maker, it breeds giants, systems, powers, and figures that loom large in defiance of God's reign. Consider the prophetic rhythm. Genesis begins with harmony. Rebellion fractures it. The flood is a cleansing, but not a cure. Humanity rises again, and so does pride, culminating in Babel's tower scraping the heavens. Later, Israel faces giants in Canaan, not just as physical threats but as spiritual tests. Will they trust God, or will they bow to fear? Every giant, every towering power becomes a symbol of humanity's relentless quest to be its own God, and God's relentless determination to redeem his world. But the symbolism reaches its zenith in the words of Jesus. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Matthew 24:37. This is no throwaway line. It is a lens. Jesus is saying, when the world returns to the conditions of Genesis 6, when violence, corruption, and spiritual chaos saturate the earth, then history will again stand on the brink. The floodwaters will not return, but judgment will. Only this time it will not be with water, but with fire, and with the unveiling of a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Echoes of Noah. We read of giants and think of legends, but the real question is not who they were, it's what they've become, and where they still cast their shadow. The days of Noah aren't buried in the past. They are seeds, sprouting again in our time, if only we have eyes to see. If the story of Genesis 6 were only about ancient corruption, it would be fascinating but ultimately irrelevant. Yet Jesus does not allow us that luxury. His warning, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man," thrust these words into the center of our age. It demands we ask, what does it look like when history begins to rhyme? How do the shadows of that old world stretch across ours? Start with the cultural climate of Noah's day: unrestrained desire, blurred boundaries, and systemic violence. Genesis 6 does not depict isolated sins. It describes a culture unraveling, a civilization intoxicated with its own appetites. People were marrying and giving in marriage, life bustling with normalcy. Yet beneath the surface, corruption pulsed like a hidden plague. That is the terrifying subtlety. Judgment came not when people expected apocalypse, but when life seemed ordinary. Now look around. We live in an age where boundaries, moral, ethical, even biological, are not just bent but erased. Technology promises transcendence. Science flirts with rewriting the code of life. Artificial intelligence whispers dreams of godhood. None of these advancements are evil in themselves. But when unmoored from humility, they echo Babel, an upward climb built on downward rebellion. It is the same impulse that birthed the Nephilim, the refusal to accept creaturely limits, the craving to merge heaven and earth on our own terms. Then there is violence, not only in wars and streets, but in the architecture of systems that normalize exploitation. Genesis says the earth was filled with violence, Genesis 6:11, and we see it today in trafficking networks, corruption in power, economies that chew through the vulnerable for profit. The giants of our age may not wield swords, but they dominate boardrooms, screens, and policies. They loom in cultural narratives that exalt self above all, and they grow taller with every compromise. Even our myths betray us. Why are we obsessed with superheroes, demigods, transhuman hybrids? Why does our entertainment pulse with themes of genetic enhancement, cosmic rebellion, and post-human evolution? These are not mere fantasies. They are secular sermons, echoes of an ancient longing to be more than human, to ascend without obedience, to seize what God has withheld. In chasing these dreams, we flirt with the same fault line that cracked the world before the flood. But what does this mean for you? Not just as a reader of Scripture, but as a disciple in this generation. It means vigilance. It means discernment that cuts through the noise of progress and asks, does this innovation honor God's order, or does it erode it? It means examining the giants in your own life, the systems you trust, the desires you nurture, the voices you obey, because the days of Noah were not marked only by systemic evil, they were marked by personal apathy. People ate, drank, built homes, planned weddings, while judgment gathered like storm clouds. That is Jesus's point. The danger is not that we will all become violent rebels, but that we will be lulled to sleep by normalcy, that we will scroll, stream, and schedule while the spiritual temperature boils around us, that we will forget we are living in a story hurtling toward a climax. So what do? We take Noah's posture. He did not build an ark because it was trendy. He built because he listened. In a world deaf to God, one man tuned his heart to heaven, and that obedience became salvation for his household. Likewise, in a generation drunk on autonomy, your quiet faithfulness, your refusal to bow to the giants of fear, lust, and pride, becomes an act of cosmic defiance. And here is the hope. Though Jesus warns of days like Noah's, he also promises deliverance. Not through wood and pitch this time, but through a cross and an empty tomb. He offers himself as the greater ark, our refuge when the flood of judgment breaks. Those who enter him pass from death to life, from chaos to covenant. And just as the rainbow crowned the new world, so a crown of glory awaits those who endure. The giants may return in form or in spirit, but their doom is certain. The Lamb who was slain is also the Lion who will reign. And when he comes, every Babel will fall, every Goliath will bow, and the earth will be filled, not with violence, but with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as waters cover the sea. Building arks in the shadow of giants. The floodwaters receded, but the warning still stands. In the clash of kingdoms, where will you anchor your soul? The story of giants is not just about what was, it's about what will be, and who you will become when the storm breaks. The curtain falls on Genesis 6 with water, judgment, and silence. But the echoes remain, rippling through time, warning every generation that the boundary between order and chaos is thinner than we think. This is not a story to file under mysteries of the past. It is a mirror, reflecting the currents of our age and the posture of our hearts. We began with a riddle. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. From that moment of desire sprang a world spiraling toward ruin. The Nephilim, towering and terrifying, walked the earth as monuments to a creation drunk on rebellion. And then, the flood. A world baptized in judgment because every thought of the human heart was only evil all the time. But amid the wreckage, a single phrase glows like an ember in the dark. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That is the hinge on which history turned, not because Noah was flawless, but because he listened. He heard the warning when others laughed. He built when skies were clear. He obeyed when obedience made no sense. And in that faith, an ark rose, a vessel of mercy on a sea of wrath. The pattern is clear. When giants rise, the faithful build. When corruption saturates, covenant restores. And when the flood of judgment surges again, not of water, but of fire and final reckoning, there will be only one ark, Christ himself. The question is not whether the storm will come, it is whether you will be found inside that ark when it does. Here is the truth the Nephilim cannot erase. The boundaries shattered by rebellion have been restored by redemption. Where angels fell, Christ descended, not in lust, but in love, not to corrupt, but to rescue. He crossed the chasm between heaven and earth, not in defiance of the Father, but in perfect obedience. And on a hill called Calvary, he bore the flood for us, so that judgment would not have the last word. So what does it mean to live in days like Noah's? It means vigilance. It means refusing to be lulled by the hum of normalcy while history hurtles toward its climax. It means tuning your ear to the voice that still whispers, "Come into the ark." It means building, not of wood, but of faith, prayer, and holiness. An ark for your family, your community, your soul. Yes, the giants still walk among us, not always in flesh, but in ideologies that exalt self, in systems that devour the weak, in desires that promise freedom, but chain us in the dark. They will roar, they will tower, but their story ends in ruin. The Lamb will stand, the kingdom will come, and those who endure will rise, not as fallen ones, but as sons and daughters of the Most High, crowned with glory and clothed in immortality. This is your moment. The hammer is in your hand, the warning in your ears. Build while there is time. Build when the skies are blue. Build when the world calls you foolish. Because the day will come when the rain begins to fall, and when it does, you will not fear. You will rest in the ark, in the arms of the One who is Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, Lion and Lamb. The giants will fall, the flood will end, and the rainbow of God's promise will stretch across eternity. Until then, build, for the King is coming.